Hey there, New Wavers. On today's show, we're going to talk about the early post-punk movement and explore some of the pioneering bands that made it what it is today. But before we begin, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel and help me spread music goodness. So like I said in my rebranding video, which you can see on the channel, this will be my first show in over 10 months. And I can't wait to get back to talking about music. Post-punk music and its various manifestations is my favorite genre of music. Pretty much all of my favorite bands from the late 1970s until today are either post-punk identified or associated with some aspect of it. This episode is the first in a series of episodes that will explore the post-punk genre and the various revival and subgenres that stemmed out of it. So without further ado, let's get this started. When you think about post-punk, what comes to mind? Bands like Joy Division or The Cure? A more artsy form of punk rock? Some say post-punk emerged after punk, but that's not entirely true. In fact, both genres pretty much emerged around the same time, give or take a few years. The first great post-punk single, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo by Pere Ubu, was released in 1975, months before the Ramones released Blitzkrieg Bop, and a full year before the Sex Pistols released Anarchy in the UK. But if you want to get technical, the most essential post-punk period took place from about 1978 to 1984. And I gotta tell you, in my opinion, post-punk did what punk failed to do. Whereas punk turned 1970s mainstream rock on its head, post-punk turned punk on its side, back, and front. Post-punk musicians favored experimental production techniques, non-rock musical styles such as dub, funk, noise, world music, and the avant-garde. They also used the recording studio as a musical instrument. In addition to these unique musical elements, another important factor stood out. A lot of post-punk musicians refused to work with more commercial record labels and opted to instead produce their own music independently. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, major record labels were not viewed as the corporate enemies they are today. But this all changed in 1977, when the Clash's song Remote Control was released as a single by CBS Records International. CBS went against the band's wishes and released the track. While the track itself was seemingly unsuccessful, it served a more important role because it raised questions about artistic independence. The Clash responded to the situation by releasing the song Complete Control on the US version of their debut album, The Clash. This controversy also kicked off the formation of the independent music scene. However, The Clash wasn't the first band who questioned things. The Buzzcocks had decided to release their first EP, Spiral Scratch, independently 4 months before Remote Control came out. By this point, many post-punk bands and musicians recognized the importance of maintaining creative control over their music, as well as keeping more of the proceeds earned from the sales of their records and live performances. By the late 1980s, independent labels became a key component of multiple music scenes. Labels like Rough Trade and Factory in the UK, and K and Discord in the US, represented anti-corporate values, which appealed to many of these musicians. Given all this, it's not surprising that post-punk found a home in the independent 1980s music scene. Post-punk gave rise to subgenres like gothic rock, industrial music, and alternative rock. By this point in time, post-punk had become pretty popular in cities around the world. Places like New York, LA, London, and Manchester had given rise to some pretty notable post-punk bands. In the United States, you had the Talking Heads and Television. In the UK, Joy Division, Susie and the Banshees, and Public Image Limited. And in Australia, bands like Midnight Oil and the Birthday Party. Other trailblazers include the Violent Femmes, The Cure, Magazine, The Fall, Wire, and Echo and the Bunnymen. By 1985, the first wave of post-punk had started to come to an end. While many of the bands I mentioned earlier continued to make music into the 90s and beyond, many other bands turned to more commercial sounds, like new wave, modern rock, and alternative. Despite this, post-punk set the tone for many of the alternative music scenes that came after it, and remains a crucial part of the evolution of music. If you liked today's show, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what is your favorite post-punk band?